Sam Lee of The Athletic is with us. Sam, good morning to you.
Yeah, hello, good morning.
Are you surprised by this decision, or did you expect that they would get essentially a full overturning with a 10 million fine?
No, I mean, we did a story ages ago, back in November, that City would not be banned from the Champions League. That kind of took a bit of a beating when they were initially, but the information was they thought they would be fine, and even if they weren't fine initially, they would get overturned at CAS. So that's what we've seen now. But I am still surprised, to be honest. I just felt that unless they had this overwhelming evidence, this irrefutable evidence that they always said they had, they would not be able to clear their name. And obviously we haven't seen any evidence of this evidence. They've kept it very private, but they've obviously used it where they needed to. And that's how they've ended up getting the ban overturned. So, I mean, I am surprised, even though that is what they insisted all along. I must admit, I am still surprised.
Where does it leave financial fair play as an instrument?
Well, I mean, I've answered this question once already. I'm still kind of, we're only half an hour after the decision. I'm still trying to toss a few ideas around in my head. I was about to tweet it now. Obviously, the initial reaction is this is the death of financial fair play. But I mean, if we don't know all the ins and outs yet. The full reasons for UEFA's verdict back in February weren't published, but they probably will be soon. And the full CAS award will come out in a few days as well. So then we'll know more. But if City have been cleared because there was this evidence they didn't do anything wrong in the first place, then it's not so much about FFP. It's more about UEFA kind of leading a flawed investigation. Where did they get their evidence? What evidence did they have at all? These kind of things. I would think that's more kind of a slight on UEFA's reputation and the reputation of the investigatory chamber rather than FFP itself. But the other element in the CAS press release today was that City partly got it overturned because some of the elements were time barred, which may mean, and again, we don't know until everything comes out, but that may mean that City were guilty of what they were accused of, but it happened more than 5 years ago, so it didn't matter. So that might be another twist in the tail when all these awards are published later in the week. And if that's the case, then maybe it's more of a problem for FFP. But at the moment, I certainly could be wrong, because FFP will be questioned now. But I think it's more an issue of UEFA's reputation and what made them feel they could go after City. I think people need to look at the PSG verdict again and why they decided not to go after PSG. I think they need to look at all of that and then kind of point fingers at UEFA to an extent, more than FFP itself. Maybe they need to change the time barred situation.
Yeah. So essentially, if again,
if you broke the rules more than 5 years ago, then that you're fine. Basically, that's what time barred is in this case.
Yeah. So we're speculating a little bit about it. So it says I'm just going to get the exact line about the time bar. The CAS award emphasised that most of the alleged breaches reported by the adjudicatory chamber of the CFCB were either not established or time barred. So we don't know what was not established and what was time barred, but certainly if any aspect of it is time barred, well then, it's almost like we did this thing and we got away with it. In that instance, all you have to do is be good at hiding how you're getting away with this stuff. Wait a few years and your crimes fritter away. You essentially get away with them. That's the essence of that. And it's hard to see financial fair play making a comeback if it's so hard to prove these cases, and it's going to take so long because you're up against the richest clubs in the world and the might of the best lawyers in the world.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. I mean, it's difficult to know what elements were time barred. I mean, maybe it was something that was quite inconsequential. It's difficult to say now without finding out what that was, and we should find out in a few days. So if you want to call me back, we'll have a proper chat about it then feel free. I mean, it is difficult now to kind of speculate on that. But yeah, if, as you say, if they were the big elements of that, and CAS have decided that it happened more than 5 years ago, then yeah, it is difficult to enforce then, because if you've been able to hide it for long enough, then you're essentially okay. But I mean, for now, we don't know that. There may have been nothing major to hide. There may have just been a couple of little trifling issues around the edges. They may have been big issues. But to be fair, we do need to remember that the other part of the CAS statement was there was no evidence for it. There was either no evidence for it or it was time barred. So we can't kind of throw the other half out of it, because that is a significant factor in City's favour, of course.
Absolutely, 100%. I guess the issue really, when you boil it back down, in terms of financial fair play, so much of the success or failure of financial fair play as a mechanism for preventing clubs from just accessing the super wealth to buy league titles and trophies, it requires incredible levels of financial auditing or self-declaration. And we know from real life that people tend not to self-report if they are butting up against rules and they break them from time to time. So as a concept, I wonder if financial fair play is now going to come under consideration. Is this the right way? We're essentially asking the clubs to tell us how they're earning money and how they're spending that money, and we're trusting them a little bit when it comes to that. I mean, obviously you can send in auditors and try and use forensic auditing firms to establish exactly how money is being spent, but again, you're up against the best accountants and lawyers in the world.
I mean, I suppose if you put it that way, it's flawed in the extent that you may be asking people who are breaking the rules, to kind of self-report, and it's not going to happen. That's the way of the world. But there is no alternative. And in terms of, I suppose, defending financial fair play from that accusation is what would be better. Like if you were of the view that financial fair play is a good thing and should be there, and it does a lot of good for the game, but it doesn't go far enough, how much further could you go? Like if clubs were willing, hypothetically, if clubs were willing to break the rules and not declare what they were doing, how could you stop them doing that? You know, like you say, there are auditors. The club have got auditors. They're external auditors as well. You know, UEFA will, I think they've got quite extensive powers to investigate as well. So, I mean, even, I suppose in the UEFA's defence, could they be criticised for not going far enough? I'm not sure how much further they could actually go.
Yeah, and maybe that's the issue.
That's the nature of the game.
It is, isn't it? I wonder what the other clubs who are competing against Manchester City and potentially Newcastle in future think about how, because a baseline for the value of these sponsorships has now been established, it seems, in some way. Again, we've got to wait for the reasoned decision, but if Manchester City say that they can get 300 million or whatever it was for the title sponsorship here and this shirt sponsorship there and this piece of advertising hoarding, then they're not going to go back on that. Those figures aren't going to come down.
No. I suppose the only other thing to say as well, if we're looking at, like, now there's going to be a light shine properly on the UEFA themselves, the investigatory chamber and financial fair play. And again, this may be boosted in the next couple of days if there's an element of City having done wrong that comes out, but they've been able to get away with it for being time part. If that is the case, then people will be using that to look at UEFA again. But I think it's a good time now, if we are shining a light on all of these things, to look again at why PSG weren't punished in the same way. They were investigated, the same as City. It's basically, there's not an awful lot of coverage on it, but Tariq Panja in the New York Times wrote a great piece on it. At the time, it might be 18 months ago now, maybe longer. Effectively, by the sounds of it, the same investigator looked at all the PSG stuff and said, how much are your sponsorships worth? And PSG said, oh, they're worth this much. And he went, are you sure? Yeah. And he went, well, fine then. Crack on. And that even annoyed the judge in charge of who would have handed down the punishment. He went, how have you come to this decision? It took him longer than 10 days to read through everything. He wanted to lodge an appeal against the investigatory chamber to say you should have investigated PSG. But because it took longer than 10 days, again, these UEFA statutes, they couldn't launch that appeal. So if we're going to look into FFP and everything now, and whatever may come from City later in the week when we get all the award, that PSG thing definitely needs looking at as well, because it seems like they didn't even, from what I've read, they didn't even bother to go as far as punishing PSG. They just kind of took their word for it. So if we go talking about all these measures about clubs regulating themselves, and if they're not going to play by the rules, you can't catch them, it seems like they didn't even want to catch PSG. So that's another element. If we're shining a light on everything, then there's certainly things that people should be looking at. You know, this isn't just a leave Man City alone thing. This is if we want FFP to be good, if you want UEFA to be fit and proper, then have a look at everything. I would say that's interesting.
Absolutely, and it probably leads us back to that fatal flaw of, like, we have to trust these businesses somewhat, or else you have to turn UEFA into an expert on the value of sponsorships globally, or they spend money with some company, and that company has to be independent. You know, there's probably ways around that, but it gets to a point where it becomes super complicated. And again, every layer of complexity offers an opportunity for the super clubs to use their wealth in a way to flout the rules and to come up with different things. We've seen it in tax policy. We've seen the world's biggest corporations pay less tax than some individuals in every state in the world because they understand and sometimes influence the writing of the policy. So the one thing in the statement today is that it says that we've found that City have been in breach of, Manchester City FC have contravened Article 56 of the club licensing and financial fair play regulations. So they set aside the previous judgment and they've said, one, they've definitely contravened Article 56, and two, they're going to have to pay a fine of €10 million within 30 days to UEFA. Article 56 is about the licensee must cooperate with the licensor, that's the country, and UEFA club financial control body in respect of their requests and inquiries. And it's essentially about providing the licensor and UEFA club financial control body with all necessary information. So this is what they found them guilty of not cooperating with their responsibilities, confirm that the submitted documentation and information are complete and accurate, and promptly notify the licensor in writing about any subsequent events that constitute a significant change to the information previously submitted to the licensor, including a change of legal form or legal group structure. They have found that City have not complied with the requests to cooperate, which is fairly embarrassing at one level. You know, I understand that they're getting away with not getting kicked out of European football, but that's essentially saying that they were not honest and fair in their dealings with UEFA and with financial fair play, which is pretty embarrassing at one level.
I suppose, I mean, do you read from that that's they're not cooperating in the sense that they haven't declared, you know, something to do with the sponsorship value, or is it just cooperating with the investigation? Because obviously the reason they've given the €10 million fine to City is because if you don't cooperate with UEFA, then, you know, that's breaking the rule and you should cooperate. But I think if City have said, why are they coming after us? Then maybe they're thinking, why haven't they gone after PSG? But regardless of that, why are they coming after us? We've got this evidence that we've not done anything wrong. And, you know, we may see that in the next few days. So why are we, like, they've obviously got, they're thinking, and we can pick holes in this or not, their thinking is UEFA have come for them unjustly from the start. And that's been obvious from their statements. At first they didn't want to get involved, then the statements got more kind of aggressive, and they said that UEFA were coming for them and it's an unfair process. So presumably they have felt it's an unfair process all the way along. They've just said, we're not going to bother with you at all. We're going to go to CAS and we'll sort it out there.
And CAS have now found that they haven't fulfilled the obligations of the rules, though. So that's what...
Well, yeah, but CAS have said, well, you didn't cooperate, and City will have gone, well, no, because we weren't going to bother, which is why they've got a €10 million fine, which is not nothing. You know, they haven't cooperated with those rules, but presumably City have thought, there's no reasoning here, like there's no point to cooperate with you, which is, it can be, well, it's against the rules, but they may have just thought, well, if UEFA are leading a witch hunt against us, if that's what they think, and it seems like that's what they think, then I can understand why, even if they're in the wrong, why they have thought that.
They don't recognise the court, essentially.
You
come into court and say, I don't recognise your authority over me. But like you're playing in the Champions League, which is a UEFA competition. You know, I can definitely see if I'm Manchester City's press department, or I'm making that point that we never felt that they had jurisdiction, and we felt we were being made an example of when there are other examples out there. It was unjust coming after us. The Court of Arbitration for Sport have said that you've definitely breached Article 56, which is you're supposed to cooperate with the company, with the sporting body that actually licenses your ability to play in their competitions.
Yeah, they have. And that's why they've got a €10 million fine, because they said it's a serious thing, but it's not serious enough to ban them from the Champions League for, which I think everybody would probably agree with. But then where you differ is obviously your point of view, which is more like, well, you've got to cooperate, and obviously you do. But like I say, even if City are in the wrong, I can imagine just me being in the same situation. If I felt I was being treated unfairly, and then the people who were untreated me fairly wanted something from me, or to say, well, provide us this piece of evidence, I might say, well, what's the point? I'll go to somebody else. Like, it's not right, but that at least is understandable. Whereas, like, you know, the sponsorship, if they were guilty of that, you couldn't really put up too much of an argument to say that's understandable. But not cooperating, like I say, if we find in the next few days, the next few weeks, next few months that UEFA or the investigatory chamber aren't credible because like I say, this is hypothetical, but if they've gone after City and decided to not go after PSG, and there's stories all over the world about, actually, look at these links to him, look at these links to him, the whole thing's not fit for purpose, is anyone going to criticise City in the end for not cooperating with them? So just so we can say, well, maybe City did break the laws but got away with it because it was more than 5 years ago, we could also say, just completely objectively, if it's now discovered that UEFA aren't fit for purpose in terms of going after clubs and prosecuting them, why would, you couldn't hold it against City, although they broke the laws and been fined for it.
Follow that through for a sec. So let's just say for a sec, Sam, that is a conclusion that a lot of people come to this week. What's next?
For financial fair play?
Well, for faith in UEFA, for faith in this competition to be run in any way that's actually fair. Like,
I know.
You think back to Real Madrid, right? Was it 2 decades ago? They were completely on their uppers, and the government wrote a check for a bit of land, and all of a sudden their debt disappeared, and that gave us the Galacticos era. Like, it's the type of stroke that happens in world football that was supposed to be finished. We were all supposed to, at the start of the year, think these are going to be the best 4 teams from the best 5 or 6 leagues around Europe, and they're going to play the best football with the best footballers, and at the end of it, we don't know who's going to win. If actually that's not going to be the case into the future, what's going to happen?
I really don't know. You might get the case of, kind of similarly to the not cooperating thing, you might get people going, well, it's wrong, but we're going to do it anyway. If we can't beat them, join them, kind of thing, which obviously isn't good for the game, but it's the same clubs who were up there earlier. So if, Liverpool, for example, or United, who won't presumably be happy with this ruling, they might just feel, well, if they're going to get away with it, we may as well. I don't think they actually will, but that could be a possibility for what comes next, this element of lawlessness about it. But I mean, this is the thing. There is no kind of perfect regulation, because even with FFP, the whole idea of it being non-competitive, that is the case. But also, I know, as Miguel says a lot, if it wasn't in place, then you'd just have PSG and City and maybe Newcastle in future, whoever can be backed by a state or indirectly backed by a state, spending loads of money on whatever, and that's not viable either. We're going to need something else, I guess. But what could it be? I'd like to think I'd have an answer for your questions coming on here, but what's next for the governance of European football? I don't know. I really don't know what it could be.
Just one for me, Sam, just on the detail of the story. I see your Athletic colleague, Raphael Honigstein, on Twitter saying it's a bit of a cheap shot to blame UEFA for being too slow off the mark, because he points out that their Spiegel story about alleged FFP infringements was from 2013, and it only broke in November 2018. So the detail is from 2013, broke in 2018 because of the 5-year statute limitations. Imagine the outcry, he says, if UEFA hadn't investigated. But so this is the case then. The infringements mostly took place in 2013, came out in Der Spiegel in 2018. In that case, and if UEFA were fully aware, and if CAS were fully aware of the fact that the detail was from 2013, why would they proceed with something knowing about the 5-year time bar?
I haven't seen this tweet. I'm trying to think. So, if UEFA knew about it in 2013, then
Der Spiegel would have known about it in 2013, and didn't. Yeah. The infringements would have taken place in that year, and then broke the story in 2018. So, I know that we're still waiting for the reasoned decision here, but it seems that some of the infringements would have taken place up to 7 years ago at this point. I would imagine that the authorities would have known the dates, known the details getting into this, and known the fact that there would be a 5-year statute of limitations on.
Right, yeah, okay, I see what you mean. So it's more about the time barred thing. But the interesting thing about this is, and I mean, I'm a bit concerned now that I'm going to have City fans knocking on my door, because I spoke to a few legal experts about what might happen, and they all agreed. The 2 I spoke to in the article, and others as well that I consulted just to kind of be sure, they all agreed that the time barred thing wouldn't matter so much. That because of the way CAS looks at cases, which is de novo, the Latin term they use for it, which basically means, I suppose in layman's terms, what the experts were expecting was that they would say, CAS would say, well, this happened 5 years ago, but there was a good reason to actually go back and reinvestigate, and they did break the laws. They did break the rules 5 years ago. So despite the fact it was time barred, we're going to side with UEFA because they did break the rules. And that's what, kind of in the legal circles, that's what they expected. And even after the case was conducted, I know in legal circles there were people thinking, City have really dropped the ball there, going after these kind of legal technicalities, because at CAS that doesn't really matter. So it's actually a surprise if you're kind of in those, or having conversations with people in those legal circles. I think a lot of people in legal circles will be surprised that the time barred argument, if that's what City put forward, actually worked. So yeah, to go back to your question about why would UEFA pursue this if they didn't think it was going to work? I mean, that may be a surprise. And when we find out about the time barred element later in the week, there's certainly more to see from that. I find it interesting that, I don't know. I mean, if you get this information as Der Spiegel, if they had got the information in 2013,
would that have changed everything?
But I mean, if they did get it then, but they couldn't use it, could they not have given it to UEFA anyway? And just in terms of investigative journalism, is that not something that could happen? I don't know. Maybe they didn't. Maybe I didn't understand the tweet correctly. But what I read from that was they knew this was going on at the time, but they didn't do anything about it until 5 years passed, which seems strange. But maybe I've misunderstood that.
Sam, I know it's obviously a breaking story, and you're mad busy, so we're very grateful to you for making the time to come and just chat to us about this, which is definitely something that we all kind of need to think about, where the future of this is actually going to work, and what kind of a tournament that we're going to be watching midweek for the next couple of years. But certainly we're going to be watching Man City play European football next season. That's the be-all and end-all at the end of this.
Yeah, it is. I suppose the actual football itself was probably one of the least important things here, because it would have been, well, are the players going to leave? Can they buy players in the transfer market? Obviously, the income, if it had been a 2-year ban, that, all of those things, is Guardiola going to leave? That would have been bigger. But now, I suppose we can focus on the football. But yeah, the football itself, the European football, City playing Shakhtar Donetsk away in the group stage again was probably the back of people's minds. But they can at least look forward to that, yeah.
Great to have you with us this morning. Thanks a million for being so generous with your time. It's Sam Lee from The Athletic there. You should look up that Tariq Panja piece that Sam referenced there. It's on the New York Times from actually exactly a year ago, essentially, July 24th, 2019. And it does look as if a lot of that stuff needs to be revisited. Remember the season that Mbappe joined PSG, and it's, you can afford Mbappe and Neymar. It's like, right, that's interesting. This is obviously, fair play to the accountants at PSG. They are very clever, and they've managed to be able to pull that off. So I don't know, what do you think in all this, Owen? Is your gut instinct that justice has been done or not?
Well, no. It's something that needs to be discussed with somebody who knows a hell of a lot more about legislation than I do, for sure.
Or not. So that's the thing, right? There will be legal argument about statute of limitations, the de novo, all that kind of stuff, right? But as a football fan, are you happy that Man City are playing European football next year?
Something doesn't sit right with me about this. The whole thing doesn't sit right with me, that investigations have happened that clearly were based in some sort of reality that Manchester City had broken rules in the past, and the prowess of their legal team has managed to overturn this. The reason why I said I'd like to hear from somebody with a bit more knowledge of the law than me, is just about this idea of the time-barred information. Like, how realistic is that to proceed in future cases with UEFA, especially if there is going to be statute of limitations on actual journalism as well, which seems to have been the case with the Der Spiegel article. Like, you're backing yourself into a corner where none of these things are going to be able to be followed through with. If that is the case, if there's always going to be a 5-year time bar on these stories.
Well, you can change that. You make your own rules when it comes to the statute of limitations is decided on a crime-by-crime basis in criminal law. Like, not all crimes have a statute of limitations. There's none on murder in Ireland, for example. You can't murder somebody and then after the statute of limitations go, hey, I'm clear. I murdered that guy and you can't do anything about it because it was 20 years. You can't do that. Whereas actually, there's loads of stuff where too much time has passed, that justice delayed would be justice denied, and blah, blah, blah. That's the principle behind it. But what you could do is grandfather in a rule that says, actually, we have decided that teams who are now reaping the reward of the millions and millions and millions that they have benefited from erroneously are going to be punished for that into the future.